All right, today in your second installment of the Flipped Classroom, we're going to take a look at the Midwest, which is a region that we should know pretty well. A lot of times when people talk about the term Midwest, a lot of people think about the lush wooded hills. Maybe we're talking about the Ozarks in Missouri. Maybe we'll get the barren eroded badlands of South Dakota or the vast blue-green Great Lakes. Maybe we're going to talk about acres of steel mills in the industrialized area around Gary, Indiana. The Midwest is all of these and more, but a drive along any of the numerous highways crisscrossing the Midwest reveals that farms are what really unite this region. Mile upon mile of fields and pastures stretch as far as the eye can see. Now, most of the Midwest is relatively flat and its soil is very fertile. Long ago, melting glaciers deposited mineral-rich materials there that promoted plant growth. In an ongoing soil building process, the plants and animals that live in the soil die and decay. The dark color organic material that you see here in this picture is called humus. Humus combines with particles of weathered bedrock to help build more soil. Now, the Midwestern climate, which has promoted soil building, also favors agriculture. Although winters can be very cold, summers are usually long and hot, and most places receive at least 20 inches of precipitation a year. So within the broad expanse of the Midwest are different variations in our climate and soil that will affect our farming. For example, in eastern Ohio, we get twice as much precipitation annually as central South Dakota. In southern Kansas, the growing season, which is the average number of days between the last frost of spring and the first frost of fall, is more than 200 days long. Near the Canadian border, kind of closer up where we live in northern Wisconsin or northern Minnesota, the growing season is only going to be about 120 days long. So here you can see just the different vegetation that grows within our areas. In our soil as well. So you can see down in parts of Iowa, northern Missouri, Illinois, this is extremely moist areas for soil. And up here where we live, up here you can see some yellow stuff over by like Sawyer County, and then up here in the Iron Ranges. It's an area that went through some drought. So you can see that through the Midwest, we definitely have a variance in not only our length of our growing seasons, but with the amount of precipitation we receive here in the country. In the warmer, wetter parts of Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa, we plant a lot of corn and soybeans. They're the major crops that we're going to find there. These states are also among the nation's leading producers of livestock, especially hogs. In the drier Great Plains states to the west, farmers are more likely to grow grains such as wheat or oats or sunflowers, which are a good source of cooking oil. Along the northern margins of the region in states such as Wisconsin, we're going to get some cooler conditions and poorer soils, which are going to favor the growth of hay and the raising of dairy cattle. Now, this picture could be any farm in Wisconsin. I mean, this is pretty typical for the type of vegetation we see in the background, as well as the types of cattle we're going to see in the picture. Now, thanks to favorable natural conditions, Midwestern farms are among the most productive in the world. In recent years, Iowa produced more corn, soybeans, and hogs than any other state in the nation. High wheat output has earned the Midwest the nickname the nation's breadbasket. Midwestern productivity is one factor responsible for the average American's being well fed. This remarkable productivity also allows the United States to export sizable amounts of its produce to other countries. Without the agricultural output of the farms of the Midwest region, the United States would be far less affluent or make as much money. Now, in years past, American farms were mostly modest family enterprises. Single families usually ran them. People worked long days of hard physical labor, and very few of these farms actually remain in America. Today, farming has become big business, which involves fewer people and more machinery. By the 1800s, farmers had the ability to grow huge crops of grain but had no way to harvest it quickly. So in 1834, a man named Cyrus McCormick patented a mechanical reaper, which revolutionized farming. Cyrus McCormick's reaper allowed farmers to harvest vast amounts of wheat in much less time than it took by hand. So as more and more farm tasks were mechanized, made into machines, farmers could produce more crops than ever before and with fewer workers. So the number of farms has decreased year after year. Push and pull migration factors have played a role in reducing the number of workers on farms. Lower incomes have pushed people off the farm as higher paid jobs have attracted them to cities. Now, even despite all this, with the amount of drop in the number of farms, farm size and output have increased dramatically. Large commercial farms use machinery, technology, and research to keep ahead. Now, agriculture also dominates the economy, even in many Midwestern towns and cities. Business activities center on dairies or on grain elevators, which are large, tall buildings equipped with machinery for loading, cleaning, mixing, and storing grain. The closest thing that we have to a feed mill left in Shell Lake is right across from the body shop where Austin Schultz's family has their shed building business. That used to be our feed mill in town. These are usually the heart of small towns, and they're very closely linked to the countryside because lots of trains will come through to deposit their grain, to have it cleaned and purified, and then it's taken out to market. Large Midwestern cities, too, are very closely linked to the countryside, and some of the tallest office buildings in Minneapolis, Kansas City, and Omaha are homes to companies whose names appear on flour bags and feed sacks. Radio stations broadcast frequent reports on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the Chicago Board of Trade. The Mercantile Exchange is the world's busiest market for eggs, hogs, cattle, and other farm products. The Board of Trade is also the largest grain exchange, which is a place where buyers and sellers deal for grain. So a lot of large companies and cities in the Midwest deal with agriculture. This is one example here in Minneapolis. This is actually the Cargill building, which is part of the University of Minnesota, where they do plant genomics, where they'll alter the genes of plants to make them more sustainable. In fact, one of my best friend's wives, she has a master's degree and she's getting her doctorate in genomics. So, but Cargill is a very large company in Minneapolis that deals with agriculture. Now, partly because of its rich supply of natural resources, the Midwest cities are also home to much heavy manufacturing. Minnesota leads the states in iron ore production, and sizable coal deposits are found in Indiana and Illinois. Easy access to these minerals spurred the development of steel mills in northwestern Indiana and in Ohio. The automobile industry grew up in the Detroit area in part because of the city's location near these steel-making centers. And right here, this is a picture of my hometown. This is Smelter by Day in Spring Valley, Wisconsin. This back here, this building that sticks out, is actually still standing in Spring Valley. It's called the Smelter Tower. And ironically, all of this stuff that you see here, this is where our football field actually sits nowadays. So pretty cool. We would stand on our sidelines in the shadow of this big smelter tower. But to make a long story short here, what would happen is trains would come in inside this building right here, and they would deposit all the iron ore into an elevator where this smelter acted like a giant furnace. And an elevator would bring the iron ore up in big giant chunks. It would then go across into the top of the smelter where it would get heated up, and it would drip down into the bottom into these big like vats or big baskets where they would catch this liquid hot iron ore, and then they would cool it and they would form it into more shapeable objects. And after it was completely cooled, it would get on another train and would go out through town. So if it wasn't for the smelter tower and iron ore, I don't know if the town that I grew up in, Spring Valley, would even exist. I mean, back in the day, this town was bigger than Eau Claire. It truly was. Obviously, that's not the case anymore. But a lot of history here in my hometown dealing with iron ore and shipping and, well, not shipping, but transporting iron ore in and moving it out to trade it across the nation. Now, many Midwestern cities like Cleveland, Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Louis, Detroit, Omaha, they're all located on the shores of Great Lakes. Or they're along major rivers. Water transportation aided the growth of heavy industries such as the manufacture of automobiles and machinery. Over 400 million tons of goods travel through the Mississippi River system each year. With the growth of the United States railway system, thousands of railroad cars were pulling into Chicago every year. Freight cars brought millions of bushels of grain and head of livestock from farms further west. In Chicago, the grain was processed and the livestock was slaughtered like you see here in a meat locker. The meat and grain were then shipped eastward by railroad. So now we're starting to understand how our natural resources were transported by different means, and then they're sent to markets, and they're literally linked out to the rest of the world. And The amount of resources we had in the United States, especially in the Midwest, was astronomical, which also led to the reason why we are one of the top economies, even still today, in the world.